Hello everyone, 4x here. Today we will be looking at different data types. Yes, it is just as boring as it sounds, but knowing some basic properties of different data types is absolutely vital for writing scripts and understanding nearly all commands that the game offers. This video is meant to be an introduction, so we won't go into great details, but still some basic knowledge of commands is recommended. If you are able to put a command or two into a trigger and have a vague idea of what it's supposed to do, you are good to go. Let's start. Numbers are very simple. A number in SQF is any number, positive or negative, rational or natural. They all fall into the same category. Their use is very intuitive, and I think that most people have no problem recognizing numbers in scripts or using them for some basic operations. Numbers support a few mathematical operations like adding, multiplying, or finding an absolute value. The complete list can be found on the community wiki, and if I don't forget, I will link to it in the video description as well. Boolean values are also very simple because there's only two of them, true and false. Again, they are simple to understand as every Boolean variable can only be either true or false, in other words, a yes or no. They are commonly used in lots and lots of commands, and their most common use is in the condition part of if-then structure. If this condition is true, do blah blah blah. Of course, in most cases, we don't use directly the word true, but we use a command or a variable that will give us a simple true or false answer, a simple Boolean value. Also note that when you are making your mission, you can't create a variable and name it true or false. These names are reserved by the game as Boolean data, and of course it's impossible to assign anything to a value. Next in line are strings, in simple terms a text. A string always comes wrapped in quotation marks, which mark this data type. A string is a place to store a number of characters. It can be letters, can be numbers or other special signs. No matter what the content inside the quotes is, the entire segment is treated as a string. So when we want to store a word to be displayed later, or a number, one letter or two full sentences, it will always be a string. No matter how long or short, and no matter what is put inside. Strings are limited to 10 million characters, by the way. Let's stop here for a moment. If I create a variable a and assign it the number 5, and then create a variable b and assign it the number 5 in quotes, could I now add those two together? No. Even though we understand that 5 and 5 could be added together, the computer can see that a holds a number, but b holds a string. Numbers and strings can't be mixed together with a plus sign, so it doesn't look any further and returns an error. So strings can hold any value and are still treated as strings. The variable b, as you can see on the screen now, is getting many different values, but they are all strings. The data type doesn't change. This is an important thing to understand because you can't use the string itself to substitute for its content. As I said before, I can't do a sum of two numbers if one of them is a string that holds a number 5. In the same way, I can't put a string into the condition field even if the string holds a word true inside, and I can't use a string as a variable even if the string contains the name of the variable inside it. If you need to display the quote sign itself, or if you are using a string inside another string, you have to use double quotes for the inner string. This situation can occur with commands like add action, where you get to write code into a string. So if you use this to call a script of certain name, you get a string inside a string. Similar situation can happen in dialog definitions and several other places as well. The next type are objects. An object is a broad term, but in the end it means some entity in the game. An object can be a soldier, a vehicle, a house, a logic unit, a rock, a weapon, but not a trigger, letter A, the word set damage, and so on. This data type is mostly operated with using many different commands. The command player gives you the reference to the object itself, to the object that is currently controlled by the player no matter what it is. It doesn't tell you much about the state of this object though, just gives you a reference to it. I'm probably not explaining it properly. We usually want to get to an existing object because we need to change something about it or get some information about it. This object entity holds all available information about itself, and we use different commands to get to them. If I want to know player's name, I need to find the player-controlled object with the command player, and then use the command name with this object to get its name. The command name works with an object, and when I use it, it expects me to provide it with an object, and in return will try to get the object's name. I can then use the command player to get to an object that is controlled by the player, and tell the command name that this is the object I want to work with. Same goes for position. I obtain some object that exists in the game and then get its position with command getPos. Because objects are quite complex and hold so much info, there is no way to create a brand new object out of the blue with just a script. I can't go new soldier equals and now write out a brand new object. I can use a command, create unit, create vehicle, create simple object and others, and give the game all necessary info like position, model, class name, all this info, but the model name is a string, the position are 3 numbers. I don't operate with an object itself, the game does it for me. This goes for pretty much all commands. You can hold a reference to an object in a variable, you can say that this variable is now the player controlled object, but you can't quite get to that object itself. The game has this little barrier there and doesn't quite allow you to reach the object itself. It just gives you plenty of ways to manipulate the object in all available ways. Yes, it is enough for you to operate with the object just fine, and you can do just about anything you want. But because of these limitations, you aren't allowed to create any object. It has to be one that falls into the rules set by the game, which is understandable and perfectly reasonable. Just please understand the difference between the objects and the previously mentioned data types, as the most basic operations are quite different there. It may sound too confusing, but with 1 or 2 examples you'll quickly understand what I mean. For now, let's move on. Arrays are another vital, super important type that holds great power in terms of scripting. An array is a container holding other things. We can make an array of numbers, array of strings, objects, or a mixed array. The items that are placed inside an array are called elements, and you can have as many elements of an array as you need. 0 for an empty array and going up to potential infinity, so until you run out of memory allocated for the game. An array is always creating using brackets, which encapsulate the elements inside. Each element is then divided by a comma from the rest. For manipulating the arrays, there is a good number of commands that allow us to add, remove, search for, take out or replace any element of the array. It's not always absolutely straightforward, but if you get the hang of working with arrays, you can use them in many situations, as they are quite a powerful ally for designing just about any system for your mission. The command select lets you pick an element from your array. Beware, the elements are numbered in a logical order, but they start with the index of 0. This means that the first element has index 0, the second element has index 1, and so on. Imagine having an array with 3 elements. Picking the middle one would mean writing array select 1. The first element has an index of 0, the second one has index 1, and the last one has index 2. If we count the elements, it gives us 3 elements, but asking for element with index 3 gives us nothing, so beware of that, it's not an uncommon mistake. There is a lot more that can be done with arrays. If you have seen some of the missions that I've made here, there is a good use of arrays, mostly because they are the only way to store multiple things in one place and keep some sort of order. But I'll leave that for another time. I'm sure that we'll talk about arrays in some other video in one way or another. The last type I'll explain here is the code type. This type consists purely of some actual code, written in SQF, and it can be anything really. You can use curly brackets to enclose some code and store it in a variable or use it directly. I can give you a very simple and straightforward example, the command for each. It expects to be given some sort of code, and you can supply the code by just writing curly brackets with some commands inside, no matter what they do. Now I hear you saying, cool, but why do I need to know all of this? It's a good chunk of theory and putting special names on common things and actions. We can all use commands without this, right? Well, yes and no. At some basic level, of course, it is possible to learn how to use some commands without being able to tell why they are formed this way or what they consist of. The SQF syntax is pretty intuitive, and if you don't complicate things too much for yourself, you can live happily without any knowledge of different data types, their names and specifics. However, for anyone who is serious about scripting, this knowledge is one of the most basic building blocks, and without it, your scripts will either not be of very good quality, or they will take way too much of your time to create. Knowing how to create and differentiate variables and data of various types is helpful in several different situations, all of which you can encounter in scripting or mission creating in general, if you go beyond triggers and the base Eden editor. The BIS community wiki is without a doubt the biggest, most unified place to get information about different commands and their use. The website is constantly updated with new information from developers and a few selected community members, and provides a catalog of all commands for Arma games, including information about their use, effect, locality, and necessary arguments. A perfect place if you want to find any command, or if you forgot how some command goes or what it needs. But when you look at any command there, you'll find that the arguments are defined by their data type, as well as the return value of the command. It helps a lot to have a clear idea what that means. Once you know what exactly the command needs and what you will get back, you can quickly use this command in your mission and won't have any problems. In case you will have some problems, the game will try to help you by giving you an error message. If you have the show scripts errors parameter enabled, which by the way I strongly recommend you to have, if by some chance you didn't do it already, you will get a white text on a dark background telling you of your mistake in your script. I have plans to make a video about this very topic in short future, so I won't go into great details, just know that these short messages are incredibly helpful, and once you learn to read them, you will be able to speed up your script writing and fixing by a significant amount. Oftentimes you get a message that looks like this: script blah blah blah, line X, encountered string, expected number, or encountered null, expected array. This message directly tells you that you are using the wrong data type for your command. It also tells you what type you need to use to fix your issue. The game tells you right away. You don't need to search the internet for 5 hours to get an answer. You don't need to watch stupid tutorials like this one anymore. No need to ask anyone. Instead, you can go to your script, change to the right data type and fix your problem within seconds. As I said, I want to make myself do a tutorial on this, so just to let you know, the error messages often contain all that you need to fix your code, and knowing what they tell you can be extremely important. And knowing different data types and how they differ is one part of understanding these messages. And there's also the situation where you talk to someone else who also likes to create missions, and maybe you want to describe him your problem. Or maybe he's telling you what to do, because he knows something that you have missed, and he's using this terminology because it's the sort of common language for people who understand scripting. Someone tells you to use a string for your command to make it work. Well, now you know what it means, and don't have to guess or anything. Now on the note of reading error messages, there are a few other data types I'd like to mention. This video just got over the most basic ones. There's more in the game. You have groups, sites, config, controls, vectors and more, but those are more specific and not as important for an introduction. But there's also a couple of very specific, but somewhat useful types that I want to mention here. Nothing is a type of something that doesn't exist. Logically, you probably don't need to declare a variable of type nothing, but it can appear in the error messages, and it also appears often in the return type of commands in the community wiki. The type nothing is something non-existent. It's an empty value that has no real use in the game, but because of how SQF is structured, all commands have to return something. Nothing is here so that a command can return something, but this something still has absolutely no value or meaning. Void is also a pretty special type, which usually appears around undefined variables. That is, a variable that doesn't carry any value. For example, a variable that hasn't been created or used in the mission yet. or variables that have been already deleted. If a variable knows its data type, but the value is invalid, the game can display the value as scalar if the data type is number, bool for boolean values, or it can just give you any value if the value isn't defined or the game is otherwise unsure about the variable contents. But this was just a little off-topic info. I mostly wanted to get this here so I can refer to it in the future videos if I manage to make something about fixing script errors or something related to that. For a basic introduction of data types, I think that this is more than enough. The info might not seem so great or useful at first, but trust me, there's a lot of info related to these basics, so we got to get through this somehow. Anyway, that's it for this video. See you next time.